Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by the Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Nicole Reiner.
And I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And announcing FNMC Presents, an album of previous commissions and competition winners performed by members of the Flute New Music Consortium. Repertoire includes works by Sean O'Pevolo, Joseph Hallman, Becca Sims, Cherie Slider, and others. Purchase a copy today. All proceeds go directly to FNMC. Flute New Music Consortium, Inc. is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Your contributions are tax deductible to the extent allowed by the law. Visit www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com for details.
Megan Ihnen is a new music force of nature. Her performances thrive on elaborate sound worlds and fully developed dramatic interpretations. A gifted narrative and non-narrative musical storyteller, Megan's performance work explores the depths of memory, nostalgia, the perception of time, and complex relationships. Passionate about contemporary chamber music and opera, Megan has worked with individuals and ensembles around the globe, including International Contemporary Ensemble, Fifth House Ensemble, Great Noise Ensemble, Rhymes with Opera, and Synchrony. She is deeply committed to the belief that new music should be performed and loved in communities of all sizes. She has recently traveled to and performed on Splice Festival, Oh My Ears, Apex Contemporary Performance, Detroit New Music, Strange Beautiful Music Marathon, Omaha Under the Radar Festival, Works and Process at the Guggenheim Series, and New Music Gathering. Her voice and saxophone duo, Megan Ihnen and Alan Tyson Present, has traveled to 24 cities in the U.S. since 2017.
Welcome, Megan.
Hi, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
We're super excited to have you.
So, Megan, I've run into your name a couple of times. We've emailed back and forth because you were supposed to do something at our new music festival before we had to cancel it, I think.
That's right. Yes.
And you were generous enough to share information so that we could include that, in our sort of Hall of Fame, since we didn't have a live festival. And then I also saw your presentation at the ultimate, is this the right name? The Ultimate Music Business Summit or something like that?
Yes. I've presented at a couple of those now. It's super exciting to kind of get together in that space.
Yeah. And you gave a really, really excellent, super, super specific presentation about, just how to organize yourself, which I thought was the highlight of the weekend for me, honestly. I mean,
thanks.
It was really great. But this is the first time we're actually talking to each other in person, air quotes in person. Yes. You and Elizabeth already know each other, right? How do you guys know each other?
We know each other from the internet and and have had lots of fun conversations together, and mostly so I don't think that we've ever also got the chance to meet in person yet. Most of our conversations have been online, right?
100% of them have been online.
Yeah.
But we're going to meet in person in a couple of weeks, which I'm very excited
about. So this is kind of how my life works, which is like, I know most people from the internet and we have talked maybe in Zoom, but then we get to meet each other in real life and in what some of my friends call meet space. And that's a really gross way of saying it, but then we get to meet for real. Do
you call it meet, MEAT for real?
Yes. In the meet space, which is like our literal physical bodies.
So I think Megan and I know each other mostly through Megan does some artist career coaching and artist advising, and she happened to be running a special the afternoon that I found out that my, at the time, like flute and music theory job was turning into a music theory and flute job. So I took advantage of that special, and Megan and I spent a lot of time that I thought was really valuable, sort of hashing through my artistic goals and things that I did want for myself or things that I did not want for myself. Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about your career coaching at all?
Sure. Well, and also I'll say, it's super exciting because some of the things that we talked about was like this album that has recently come out for you and like all sorts of cool stuff to see that just the way that we've had some of those conversations and then you've put all of those things into practice. That's the ethos of my coaching business, is really to feel like you have a teammate in the things that you want to work on. So much of our like freelance lives, so much of our music lives can feel very individual and isolated, and it doesn't have to be that way. There are people that you can have conversations with about, organizing your musical life, what I think of as both kind of the mindset of what we do as well as the nuts and bolts of our career. And that's really how I structure those kinds of conversations, which is, do we have goals for what you want to experience in your music life, and how do you think about your music life, what has gotten you to this point in your career. And then really the kind of three pillars of my music business side of things are the offers, clients, and systems, and just really digging in and seeing, do I feel like I understand how the business side of my professionally creative life works?
Well, Elizabeth, are you, I mean, the album, I guess, Megan alluded to that. Do you have anything else you'd be willing to share? I didn't even know that you guys have worked together in this capacity. This is very exciting. Like what else has happened from the result of this coaching?
For me, it was because, I think of myself as somebody who has a pretty good idea of where I want to go and what I want to do. And I remember getting off the first call with Megan and kind of giving my husband, Don, the rundown of like what we've talked about. And he was like, you've talked about all of those things before, dummy. He didn't say the dummy. I think for me, it was really helpful to see it all in list form. There was this really cool Google Doc that I still have linked somewhere on one of my computers that was like Elizabeth Robinson's world domination plan. And so in the time since that initial meeting, I've sort of taken on the habit of having like a document that has long-term goals, like things I'd like to do at some point, but I have no idea how the logistics are going to work or how that's going to fit into my life. Things that I'm working on, but like a couple of the pieces aren't in place, which was, I think, where the album was at the time. I like knew that I wanted to do something, and I knew that I had these sort of randomly generated commissions where like there wasn't really a theme and they didn't really go together, but they were all things that had fit in different components of my life. And then nearer to the top, like things that I need to do like this week because there's a recital coming up or there's a conference or whatever. So it was really helpful to me to have maybe a different way than the 5, 10, 20-year goal, but just sort of in progress, needs help. Maybe someday it wouldn't hurt to talk about with people as, life permits. And then there was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like there was just a little bit of like mindset readjusting. I hesitate to call it like career therapy, but there were a lot of things that were going on in my life that felt very systemic, but in fact were actually just like, you let this happen, so now you get to sit.
I would never say that to you. but also
attitudes or approaches towards myself or my career. And I want to be really clear for anybody who's listening to this and doesn't know Megan. Megan was super sweet. There was no finger pointing or anything like that, but a lot of like, do you really need to think about it like that way? Or does it have to be that way? Or did you just like decide it needed to be that way? And more often than not, it was me. I was the one sort of creating the structure, and it's been interesting in the time since to at least have the wherewithal to like look at a structure in my life and go like, is this permanent? Am I making this? Does this have to be this way, or can I sort of throw up hands and walk in a direction that suits me more? So those are the things I recall.
I love that. Elizabeth, I feel like you might agree with this. I think that most of my clients think of me as like the queen of reframing. So like when we're talking about something and I'm like, great, let's think about another way to look at that. And also, just that gentle reframing of how am I perceiving the situation? Is it as fixed as I think it is?
Mm-hmm.
And where do I have more agency in making my life work the way that I want it to?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like through conversations, it's not always blink of an eye, right? Obviously, that's not how our lives work. But if we start to have a conversation with someone who we can trust with that information and say, what are the ways that I could like make change in this area, and really talk about that rather than feeling like our situations are completely fixed. I find that we're able to move things around. It doesn't feel quite so heavy sometimes, even when we're going through really tough situations. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that's something that kind of carries through into, other parts of our lives.
Yeah. I also remember a conversation about buckets of time, and I don't remember. Well, I remember you were talking about how I was sort of describing my life in little pockets of activity. And actually, some of them were related to FNMC and some duties that I had related to that. And you were talking about how it seemed like I had categorized my life in little buckets of time. And anytime a bucket came empty, I was filling it, but not necessarily filling it with things I had consciously chosen because they were bringing to fruition something from the world domination list. And that's actually, now that I'm saying that out loud, that's probably a conversation I need to have with myself again about.
These are ongoing conversations.
Yeah,
like
I was going to say.
Just every year I'm having the same conversations with myself about like, what is filling up my time? Is this what I've chosen? Is this moving me towards my like overall goals? And let me tell you how many things get on that list that are just like nice to haves or not really something that's important, but somebody really wanted it, and so you're like, sure, I'll make that happen. Suddenly that becomes such a large part of your, schedule and life that you're like, how did I get here? Like,
I can't relate to that at all.
It sounds like creating new habits and a new way of living a more conscious life, and then kind of regular updates and maintenance that you want to schedule.
And I think that so much of like coaching, like I said, the teammate part is really important because we can do a lot of that work up in our brains, and we can follow all the lists on the internet, and we can do all of that kind of like all of those exercises and still not have someone that's like, have you thought about this thing? And then it's the part where you're like, yeah, I didn't really want to look at that, but but it hopefully in a way with someone that you trust, so that they can either that gentle nudge or that push or that like, let's peel back a layer and look over here at something that you're not really ready to like do it on your own. But if somebody asks you, you'll venture into that and start to kind of have that processing moment together. It's really powerful in that kind of together space rather than trying to do it all on your own all the time.
Megan, you do this for so many people and from different subcategories of the profession and groups, it sounds like too. Do you have anyone you can do this with for yourself? I mean, do you have someone who can be your teammate?
I definitely do. I've definitely worked with coaches. Highly recommend. It is something that I have to remind myself to do, and just kind of keep reaching out and kind of thinking about like, who is the teammate or the mentor that I need right now for the things that I'm working on? Which parts of my business do I need more people for? And the other side of that I talk to a lot of my professional colleagues about is, do you need mentorship or do you need assistance, right? And so sometimes in my business, I need someone who I can delegate tasks to, right? At a certain point, your team has to grow so that you can accomplish more of the things you were looking to do. And sometimes you need mentorship, right? Sometimes you need education. You need someone who can walk you through the process, and really drilling down into whether or not it's mentorship or assistance that is necessary at that point in time is crucial to the way that my business works, and usually with a lot of other people. And I find that working with composers and performers, one of the things that I usually hear is, oh, if I just had an assistant, this would work better. But then I lovingly push back and go like, well, is it that you need an assistant, or is it that you need to learn how to like run this part of your business? So those are things so necessary to talk about. And just having a manager or an assistant or a grant writer or whatever in your life doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly you'll have business if you don't understand what your business is. So like,
Yeah.
that's a big one. And then also for me, so I do the same thing for myself when I'm feeling overwhelmed by tasks and things like that, and I go, oh, if I just had someone else in my business to do this for me, and then I have to come back and go, am I being efficient with what I'm doing? Or am I saying, oh, if I just had more people, then this would work out, because I'm not really being strategic with the decisions that I'm making.
Do you feel like there are many differences between, so like I was looking at your website, which is, we'll include it in the show notes. It is an amazing resource, and just sort of like the War and Peace of websites. I mean, it's all subscribed. I mean, I think you could curl up to that website for weeks and still be reading substantial things and learning more.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's like really substantial information, but what I dug up in terms of coaching, since we're on that train, is you offer coachings to composers. You have that in a menu. You offer them to I assume when you say coaching for musicians, that's kind of the performer side of things. And then you also talk about work that you've done with music schools. Is that also under the umbrella of coaching? And how do these kinds of work maybe differ or not between those different groups?
I think that's a great question. I think of, well, listen, I'm a rule of threes kind of like obsessive. So I think of everything in threes in my life, but I think of my umbrella of activities as really being like my performance life, my singing, performing life, my administrative life, and then also my like teaching, coaching life. And so in my performance life, that is all the performances, commissioning, like doing that kind of teaching composers how to write for the voice, like that kind of stuff. That kind of could fit into a couple of camps, but that all goes there, doing recordings, doing, all of that. And then my administrative life is really like, I'm the executive director of the Live Music Project. So I run a nonprofit. I try to, I'm doing that administrative work to the best of my ability. In the past, I have had ongoing clients for social media management, like all sorts of stuff. So I've had ongoing clients, especially when it comes to communications and marketing. And then in my kind of teaching, coaching life, that's coaching my individual clients, teaching workshops. I teach a couple of courses at Peabody, and this would be any sort of like the Ultimate Music Business Summit, like that kind of stuff. It all kind of fits under that umbrella for me. And I try to make sure that when people visit my website, they can think about who are they, what role are they inhabiting in which they want to interact with me and what I'm doing. And that kind of leads them to certain areas of what I do, but it's all still me. So I keep it all in the same website and say like, hey, this is where you can find out about the things that I do. And it kind of shows like, or walks my talk a little bit about what are my offers, and then can you find my offers publicly listed somewhere, right? So performing and like all of the performance stuff, all of the coaching stuff, and can you find those things and then figure out what is the next step to do that with me? So like when you land on a performance page about like the various programs that I offer, there's always something that says like, to book this show, take this step, right? Or if you want to coach with me, sign up here on this calendar, right? Those kinds of things.
So when you do a visit to it, I think that's I think that's maybe the thing that stands out as being most unique to me when I look at your website is I know, I can find the information I want, and then I know what path to take. So I think you've set that up very well. What do you do if you visit a school?
So most people are bringing me into their school environments to perform and then also to give master classes or workshops, right? Those are usually kind of the full suite of something when I'm brought in as a guest artist. And it can also include like composer readings or voice lessons or, you know, other coachings or all of that kind of stuff. Because when you are a freelance artist and you want to partner with academic institutions, as you both know, the academic institution or the person bringing you in has specific goals that they want you to accentuate, right? Or to accommodate in what you're doing by bringing you in. That's the exchange of value, right? They're trying to say, like, by you coming to our school, you're going to inspire our students with your performance. You're going to help them understand other types of like repertoire, performance styles, all of this kind of stuff. And then the things that set you apart are, can you also augment what they're doing in the classroom by providing music entrepreneurship workshops? Can you coach their students on various things? What are you adding to that so that they're getting this accentuated educational experience for their students? And so that's what I'm doing when I show up for a residency or for a guest artist position, is saying, well, here are all the things that are available that I teach, that I do. And then also, what does your budget look like? Because I'm happy to do all of these, but they cost different things. And so you get to kind of pick from them. And that's what, and so anytime I've worked with, you know, a guest artist situation, I'll say, well, hey, and I even have like a price list for these things. I'm like, hey, this is generally all the things that I offer when I come do these things. And you can kind of pick based on your budget. And also we can just kind of talk about what that looks like.
That's great advice for anybody who is hoping to start doing more appearances at schools. I've seen this change in the, I don't know, 16 years, I guess, that I've been at University of Wyoming. I mean, it used to be when we had guest money, it was allotted to specific studios at specific times, and then just no questions asked, just spend it on who you want, you know? So I would bring somebody in and they would just do flute stuff, and it would benefit my 15 students or whatever. And who cares about the rest of the department? And now if I want money to bring somebody in, I had better be able to make the case that they're going to benefit the whole department. Yeah. And I think that that's happening in other schools too, as music, or as money becomes sparse and as recruiting efforts get ramped up everywhere. I don't know if that's happening at the bigger programs like Peabody, but it sure is out here in the mountains.
Everybody's got those challenges for sure. And like, and you know, and people always want to see, are you making the most of this part of our budget, you know, so that we can impact students in all of these ways. So you're absolutely right. That's happening everywhere. And I do want to be clear, because I bet some people listen to the podcast who are probably in academic teaching situations, that it's different for me, because I am not necessarily doing my guest artists or residency things as recruitment tactics, right? So this is a part of my business. So I'm working in these scenarios as an income stream, right? Rather than a recruiting technique, which I know a lot of, you know, academics, you're going to go about it a little bit differently, because you're specifically maybe swapping, like, to do recruitment at each other's schools and stuff like that. So I want to make sure that anybody listening to me kind of hears that there are different ways to approach that. And mine is because I have these goals and these intentions over, you know, different goals and intentions.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You kind of talked about the rule of three and the sort of three different roles that you see yourself having. And this is something that I've been really interested in with everyone that we've interviewed that seems to do multiple things.
Yeah.
Do you experience challenges sort of toggling between the different roles, or are you a person for whom it is more holistic and you're all kind of the same? Like, I guess, can you talk about your philosophy of being a many-faceted individual, but also, you know, professional?
Yeah, definitely. I think in my experience, I have always been this way. I've always been this kind of multifaceted. And then coming up in my career, I just kind of knew that financially I didn't have a situation in which I wouldn't be this. So it's important to me to have diversified income streams, if you want to like put a fancy little label on it, right? But just that means like that I'm able to pay my bills all the time, like and use my various skill sets to do so, right? And over the course of my career, I just kind of make choices to optimize for time freedom and optimize for financial freedom. So it means that I'm moving from, kind of employment situations that are more fixed, and into things over time, things that pay better, things that give me a more flexible schedule, right? So all of my professional activities are kind of like moving that direction, and I'm thinking about that consciously. The question that you asked about, do I reconcile myself across those different things, is I feel totally comfortable in my many hats, as a person. What has been challenging over the years, and something that I've come to a better understanding of, is that people outside of you will see you in the hat or label that they most associate with you. Yes. And that doesn't mean that the rest of your hats are invalidated or anything like that. It just means that that's how they know you, right? Sure. And this used to bother me quite a bit, because especially if you do any sort of administrative thing, right? If somebody knows, it's like that whole old Hollywood adage, which is like, don't let anybody know that you can type, right? Is like in music, don't let anybody know that you do admin. So, but I was like, well, the cat's out of the bag. I do it anyway. So, but it meant that for years still is, but all the time, it's just that people will approach me because they know that I do administrative work, and they'll approach me for that rather than approach me for like a singing gig or whatever. They're like, oh no, we already know a ton of singers. We just need somebody who's going to like do social media for us or something. And I'm like, that's cool. That's fine. So that took me a long time to two things there, to realize the first part, which is people approach you with the thing that they know about you. And the second part of that is that I was actually spending more time talking about and kind of promoting that side of my life. So I was talking more regularly, or posting, or communicating in general about the work that I was doing in my administrative life, and not necessarily communicating as much about what I was doing in my performance life. And so I had to realize, well, they know that about me because it's the thing I'm telling them all the time. Mm-hmm. And if I want to change that, I have a little bit, this is a place where I have power and agency to tell them the things that I'm excited about. And so I very specifically made choices, probably 10 years ago or something like that at this point, to consciously talk about the things that I want people to hire me for. Yeah. Rather than whatever. And so for me, that looked like, if somebody says, how are you? And I respond with busy because of XYZ things, that's the thing that they know about me, right? Sure. And also those little subconscious things where if I respond with busy, then people are like, well, she's really busy. I'm not going to ask her if she wants to do this gig, right? So consciously choosing to say, oh, I'm doing great, or fill in the blank. You don't have to always be positive about it. Like, you can just be honest about what's going on in your life. But I want to communicate the things that I want to have conversations with that person about. Sure. Oh, I'm really excited because I just did this commissioning project. It has like 26 composers in it and blah, blah, blah. I'm really thrilled about that. Commissioning is a big part of my life. And then the person on the other side of that conversation is like, wow, the next time they think about me, they're like, Megan does a lot of commissioning. We should ask her about that, right? It becomes the thing that they remember rather than, oh, Megan's really busy with her day job kind of situation.
Yeah. I love how you just answered a question I didn't know that I had. That was amazing, and something I think I needed to hear now. But what I also wanted to hear from you was sort of the human experience of being the person who does all three of those things. Like I guess when I think of like my buckets of responsibilities, I have a really hard time getting out of one bucket and into the other bucket. Like it's transitioning is an issue.
Yes.
And you go to, as an academic, you go to these things on how to like be a better and more productive academic. And even my own university was like, hey, try and schedule your research days different from your teaching days. And I was like, hey, friends, that's awesome. My teaching days are all days. Like, am I
Yeah.
awake?
Yeah.
How am I teaching today? Um, but they're right. If you can
Yes.
separate them, it's easier to like wake up and be that creative person. So I guess as a person I'm hearing who has a similar life experience to me, and that all things are necessary at all times, how do you balance the need to be two or three different buckets like on the
Yes.
same day?
I'm going to answer this with the fact that I think I recognize in myself that I've worked very hard on getting more skilled at task switching. That's part of it. I don't want to negate that. I'm like, oh, it's just so easy. You just do it like this, but it's more that as I've understood what my goals are and understood my own process for music preparation, for understanding how long a project takes, like those kinds of things. Those are things that you don't know at the beginning of your career. You don't really fully understand how long it's going to take to learn that 20-minute, chamber music piece, right? Mm-hmm. But over time, you definitely are like, I've got a pretty good sense I can get this done in like X amount of time, right? That also means that for me, my own little life hacks about that are just, honestly, I'm just going to tell you like straightforward, this is like how I do it. Yeah. And this will not work for really anybody but me, because this is the way that my brain works. But hopefully the conversation here is figure out what works for your brain and do those things. So the way that I love to do this is what I call the 10-minute meeting. And I start in the morning and I set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes and I write out in a legal pad, right, the smallest kind of units of the things that I want to accomplish that day, right? So it's not, these are all the micro actions. So I talk about micro actions on my podcast a lot, but micro actions are the smallest unit of the thing that you're trying to accomplish. And so it means write the grant is not a micro action because there's like 75 things that go into it, right? So if it's finish the budget for this particular grant, or, write a budget narrative, something like that, right? Those are micro actions because it's one unit of things, right? So in my legal pad, I take my 10 minutes and I just brain dump all of the things that I'm wanting to work on that day. And then I just try to make it through. And over time, I've also developed a kind of ability to like look at my list and be like, these are higher energy things, these are lower energy things, and try to kind of put those into my day. If I'm moving between spaces for like teaching and things like that, then I'm a little bit more aware of like, okay, I'm going to my office and I'm going to check off these things on the list. I'm going to do that kind of stuff. But having that kind of list cuts down on decision fatigue for task switching, because I'm not thinking about what necessarily I'm going to task switch to next. I'm just following a list of things. I'm just like, boom, okay, moving through this. What's next on this? What's happening after that? The other part that I want to add to that statement is I often schedule my future self. And this has a lot to do with like those long-term projects that are basically for you. You're the only person running it. You're the only person in charge of like whether or not even it happens in this life. Is like scheduling your future self is, if I am thinking about, okay, well, I want to create this album or whatever in the future, is going to my Google Calendar and blocking off time like 2 months from now when my days don't look as ridiculous as they do at the moment, and putting it on the calendar with a description that says, like, putting it on the calendar for like an hour that says, figure out the repertoire that's going to be on Sleep Songs Volume 3, something like that. And because I follow my calendar, when I get to that day, nothing else is blocked over it. I haven't like scheduled something else at that time. And I look at it and I go, oh, okay, well, I'll do that. But if I don't give my future self those things, then it just becomes that thing that sits on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no trigger for me to be like, oh, let me just go visit the back burner for a while and see all these things that I thought I was going to do this year. There's either it's happening or it's not. Like, so for me, those are the two ways that I approach that, which is like, if it's something that I'm going to be able, that I'm doing today, it's going on that list because it's like right at the front of my mind. And then if it's something that's kind of overarching, then I'm putting it onto my schedule into the future in a way that when it shows up, I'm like, oh, I'll do that now. That sounds good. Thanks.
It sounds like something that takes a lot of discipline. I mean, it's very laudable to, I have had this experience so many times when I get to the end of a year, because despite my professed aversion to New Year's resolutions, you still start thinking in January about what you can do and what you want to do, and look back at like, oh yeah, that was something I really thought was going to be a great idea in February of last year, and I just let it wither on the vine again. Great advice, and a great amount of discipline and organization to keep going back to that and not let things die. I want to talk about your music making also, because you aren't just another vocalist. You are also, I mean, if I can only imagine, I mean, if we lived in the same area and I wanted to collaborate with a vocalist as an instrumentalist and as a new music fan, you would definitely stick out to me. So, I mean, I wonder, when you were talking earlier about, having to sort of push the performance side of your work forward because people weren't thinking of that. Of course, your perspectives of just how hard it is to find someone to do admin work is probably a big part of it. I wonder sometimes too, if there's still that sense of, the best musicians don't have any other skills.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, I think my oldest colleagues still have this idea that, oh, well, this person, it's like this almost idiot savant kind of attitude towards the best musicians are just basically infants that, you just sort of escort them to the piano and then they poop out all the most amazing notes or something, which of course that's not what it is, right?
Amazing.
But you have many very interesting projects listed on your website, and really unique. Sleep Songs is certainly something that stuck out to me, for instance, and you can talk more about that if you want. But I feel a really strong sense of personality from you, and of like, what you like and what you want to do. Mm-hmm. How do you choose? Do whatever you want with this question. How do you choose your projects? How do you choose your chamber music partners? How do you choose your composers? I mean, wherever you want to go with that, because you do a lot, but it definitely, I get a sense that, I mean, it's not helter skelter, not by a long shot. I mean, there's a definite personality at play here.
Well, Nicole, I really appreciate that. Thank you. Like that's, let's see here. How do I choose my projects? It's always a mixture of things, right? Because it's like, are you getting hired for things? So obviously that's gonna filter into this. How do I choose my collaborators? Very slowly. I would have to say that all of my like ensembles have happened over the course of years, because we like started doing something together and then we were like, oh, rehearsal works really well and we hustle the same way. Let's be in an ensemble together. And there have been multiple situations in which one of those things is good and one of those things is not quite the best fit, and those are not like ongoing ensemble relationships that I pursue. And I think when I'm choosing things that I want to work on in new music, it's such a blessing because you get to be a little bit more of your own self, your own artist mentality in what you're doing. And I get to collaborate with so many composers who want me to bring that side of myself to the table. So it's really, really satisfying for me as a musician to be in new music that way. And I love singing traditional music as well as like singing early music, traditional classical music, opera, that kind of stuff. I love all of that, and will definitely always take a gig that's like is some, you know, repertoire that I love to sing from those time periods. And it's just that I've also built a reputation for being on board with doing new things, right? And so people will call me for new music gigs, right? Whereas like I'd have to go audition and pitch myself for like classical repertoire. Right. I do still pitch myself constantly for new music stuff as well. But when I always say that like you're in charge of picking your interests and the market picks your niche, right? So it's not, I don't have to be responsible for like telling everybody that my niche is this thing, right? I'm responsible for pursuing what I'm interested in and pursuing that by pitching myself for opportunities, by applying for things, by asking to be put into something, you know, that I want to do. And then the market picking your niche is like the thing that you keep getting hired for is all of this stuff. So it becomes like this is what the field kind of knows about you and goes to you for first, right? So I get asked to do those things, you know, because develop a reputation for being, you know, I probably hopefully good to work with, but also a singer who can count and like likes to make all sorts of different timbres and sounds and stuff like that, and is not afraid of what people would consider like extended techniques, you know. So once you develop a reputation for that, then people recommend you because they're like, oh, you definitely want to talk to Megan for this. So,
yeah.
But yeah, picking my projects is usually because it's what I call like the idea vault. The idea vault is like if you're thinking about something and you're like, wow, I really want to. Black Meridian's kind of like this. I was introduced to one of the pieces that's on this touring program by a friend, and I was like, wow, that piece is so bonkers. It's called Ihnen. It's this Vondelweiser piece by Antoine Boyer. My friend told me about it because it's just like a couple lines of text instruction that says one note passed between two players for 20 minutes until one person stops, right? And that's it. And so you get to like, and so I was like, oh my God, how do you program this piece and not have the audience think that you're punking them? What do you do to make them get all the way through that piece and go, that was super cool, right? And so I felt this challenge to be like, how do you present this or program this in a way where people feel engaged and excited by it rather than feeling like left out, or like, are they making fun of me as a listener, right? What's going on here? And that's actually how that whole program like started to come around. Is I took this to Alan Tyson, in my collaborator in MIATP, and I was like, I want to create a show that uses the metaphor of black holes for a failing relationship.
Wow.
And then that piece is kind of like the singularity of that black hole, because I thought, oh, well, there's so much stasis in this piece. It's just one note and the other. What does that remind me of? It's like that feeling of time standing still in a black hole. And I thought, okay, well, what do you do to get an audience all the way to that point and feel like they welcome that moment? And I said, okay, well, overwhelm their ears, right? You build up to such a moment that stasis becomes this like welcome sound and experience at that point. And so we commissioned the composers that are part of it. We told them kind of where they are in the lead up to that. Wow. And so the beginning of that show, the intensity of like rhythmic motion and groove and stuff like that becomes more and more and more intense as you go from the first piece to the last piece in the first section. And then you get to Ihnen and kind of builds this story arc and stuff like that. So this is why I got excited about this idea. I got excited about doing that in a way where audiences were going to be engaged and compelled by the story and the musical sound worlds, such that they'd go, oh, wow, I feel this, rather than, sure, that was nice. And so that's kind of the very long answer for how do I pick my musical projects.
That sounds amazing. Had you and Alan worked together before putting this show together?
We did. We toured. Okay, so Alan and I first met on Twitter because I was asking for like solo voice pieces, and he like sent me one, and I ended up performing it. And we met in person at the New Music Gathering in Baltimore. And Alan's living in North Carolina, I'm living in Iowa. And while we're all out having like drinks or whatever, Alan like leans across the table and he's like, "We should play together sometime." And I go, "Sure, yeah." Like, because we live in different places. I was like, "Sure, fine." The way that people are like, "Let's get coffee together." And you're like, "Great." Like, and if you don't make a plan for it, it's never going to happen.
Right.
So Alan goes, "We should play together sometime." And I go, "Yeah, sounds awesome." And he calls me like 2 months later and he goes, "I got a 20-minute song cycle written for us." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "I'll come to Iowa if you can book us a performance." And I was like, "Challenge accepted." And so not only did I book us one performance, I booked us 3 performances in 2 different states. And I was like, "We've never worked together before, but we're gonna figure it out." So from that experience, we kind of created our first touring show. And that was part of the way that I was like, "Listen, I don't want to be in an ensemble that has to like churn through repertoire." I feel like so much of my freelance life is learning things and then only getting to perform it once or twice.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm really, really craving a musical experience in which we work up a show and then we tour it so that we get to do multiple performances of the things that we create. And he's like, "Thumbs up, I love it." And so that first touring show became this thing that we called This World of Yes. And I think we did something like 40 performances of that, like all over the United States. And so when I say we hustle the same way, I definitely mean that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is so intense.
I'm an intense person, Nicole.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Ellen is too. Yeah, I mean, we talk to so many composers who very understandably say, of course, I think they're not performers when they say this either, but we talk to so many composers who say, "Yeah, I'm not writing music unless I have performers for it already, that unless I know that it is wanted in the world." So to commit to a song cycle as a way of bringing the band together that's pretty impressive.
It was great. I was like, "All right, we're doing this." And that show also kind of like changed repertoire. It also, by touring that, we figured out a lot about like who we are and what we're like on stage and how we want to engage audiences and all of that stuff. You don't learn it any other way than by doing it, so you got to be in that space as often as possible. So I think both of you know my friend Jessica Redman as a composer.
Yeah.
And she has this piece. I love telling the story about this in This World of Yes. She has this piece that she wrote as one of those like Iron Chef composer kinds of situations where it's like they write a piece like overnight or whatever in 24 hours. She wrote a piece that has like 2 movements, but the first move, and she has it in both a voice and saxophone version and a voice and viola version. So I have performed this one movement of this piece called Epilogue like so many times, like probably over 50 to 60 times in various situations. I performed it in all sorts of like masterclass type things, comp seminar stuff all the time. And she wrote to me and she goes, "Megan, this piece is the most performed piece in my entire catalog by far because of you." And I was like, and she's like, "You never know which piece it's going to be." She's like, "Because you decided that you loved this piece and you perform it everywhere. Now it becomes like the thing that is like everywhere." And she's like, "And I wrote it in like 24 hours. And I was like, "It's great. I love this piece." So I think that's so funny about, especially working with composers, is like you commission them or with these extant pieces. And if you find something that you're like, "I really love this piece and I want to champion this piece, I want to take this everywhere," then you can be responsible for that composer. I wish it were a longer piece because then I get her more royalty payments. But you can be that person who takes their takes their pieces and like shares that with so many different people. And I love that about performing.
I love what a small world it is, because we interviewed Jessica a little bit earlier, and I feel like this is I feel like she alluded to this. I mean, she didn't use your name, but this sounds like a familiar story, this piece that she wrote in 24 hours and is very, very popular. So, and here we are. Here's the other version of the story.
Yes, all on this podcast.
Worlds are colliding.
So great. Yeah, it is such a small world. I think that there's two ways of looking at that statement. I think I hear a lot of people say it in a negative way sometimes, and they're like, oh, it's such a small world. It's all about who you know. And that's coming back to that sense of reframing. I always want, especially like students, to hear like, it's such a small world in such a way that it's easy to go make connections with people and build community with a huge swath of people that are working in new music, by just showing up at things, by like being present in virtual or in physical spaces, and that people like working with you because they trust you. They trust that you are a sure bet for their piece, for their music, for their series, whatever. And so it's all about who you know. It doesn't have to be this super negative thing. It's about the fact that when you know them, they trust that you are a good collaborator for something because you've spent time together or you've connected over something. And so it doesn't have to be like this negative thing, or like that networking has to be such a kind of a dirty word for people. It's like, no, just remind people that you have the same values and like that you like working together. Like, that's my feeling about that.
That's a great sentiment to end on. Can we torture you with our last and favorite question?
Oh yes.
Before we do,
Oh,
we've been doing one thing with composers that I want to do to Megan. And I want that to be one of our new also favorite questions.
Okay.
So we've been asking composers if the ideal commission or collaboration could just fall into their lap, what would it be? So if you could like manifest today, no strings attached, the ideal collaboration, or somebody called you today and said, hey, we want you to sing blah. Who do you want to work with? What do you want to do?
Oh, this is hard. Okay.
No.
Also, you're going to try and get me in trouble because like then composers are going to listen to this and be like, you didn't say me, Megan. Like you didn't like,
or you're going to get a bunch of unsolicited scores.
Yeah, right. Like,
or the composer that you say might hear it and actually call you, which
true. This is amazing. I think, okay, I am going to give you like one of my like performance goals is that I have loved Peter Lieberson's Neruda songs for years, and like it is just one of my wish list pieces, but it's not something that everybody like can do or comes up all that often. So it's like, this is me just throwing it out into the universe. Is I desperately want to sing that cycle so badly that I'm like, okay, that's one. The commissioning side of this, oh man, there is just such a long list of composers that I want to commission. One of them that I'd love to do would be to work with Angelica Negron and do something like chamber music ensemble wise. And she's very busy. So I'm like, it would have to be like a, stars aligning kind of situation to like make that happen. But the thing that she did with Sharonova, and they just did this kind of group commission called the Blue Hour, that whole group of composers and a piece like that would just be so satisfying and like transformative to like work on. So I just would love that. There's so many things.
I'm sure there are more. We could probably go for hours.
I know.
if something,
you know how people like have like
in
Amazon wish lists. I should just like spoof that on my website and be like, this is my Amazon wish list of like new music things.
Well, let us know if you do. It'd be interesting to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Nicole, do you want to ask our other favorite question?
Yes. That was a great question though. Our last question, and I think I warned you about this one. What are 3 things you're listening to right now?
3 things I'm listening to. Okay, so let's see here. One of them is Alan and I have just gotten into in like the last few years because of his sister and brother-in-law, gotten more into listening to EDM and various like EDM artists, gone to these like festivals, and it's such a fun time. And one of our favorites is Grizz, and there's an album called, like, he has a series called like Chasing the Golden Hour, but there's a song on one of the most recent ones called Airplane Mode, which I feel like is the quintessential like vacation jam of the summer. So please take a listen to that.
Nice.
And let's hear, what else am I listening to? I am listening to, we're about to go on this long road trip. So the other part of that is that whenever I'm on road trips, I'm either listening to audiobooks or I'm just like, it's like 70s radio stations, like all the way. So I'm just jamming out to like all these hits from the 70s, singing at the top of my lungs. That's a big one. And I'm listening to like a lot of Pierrot ensemble kind of stuff with voice, like that, because I'm trying to pull some things together for a potential performance opportunity. So then excited to kind of revisit some things that I've loved performing in the past and then want to kind of bring back around. So I'm thinking of like one piece that I was just listening to was Michael Lancey's Songs for Joe Hill. So that's a cool piece. If you want to check that out, if you're into like kind of chamber ensemble works. So that one, yeah, just thinking about all sorts of stuff that I'm like, what threads can I pull together to make these various performances happen? But I just love it so much, and just feels like now that we are on this side of the pandemic or wherever we are in that timeline, I'm just so thrilled that we get to work with each other in person again and travel and perform in all of these different spaces for like different communities. I just got back from New Music on the Bayou, which is up in northern Louisiana. So it's like these 2 like smaller towns in northern Louisiana, but they have a whole new music festival, and like the community turns out, and it's so cool to share these like bonkers pieces with a whole bunch of people that are like, cool, yeah, thanks. Like, I don't know how they make this magic happen, but they do. And yeah, I'm excited about that.
Well, that's awesome.
Thank you both so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure to talk with both of you.
Any excuse to hang out with you for a little bit is
likewise. Let's do this in person next time.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.